So I want to start by saying also a huge thank you to the FT for sponsoring this event and also being one of our gold sponsors. It's enabled us to do a lot more at codebar behind the scenes, and it also allows us to put on events like this as well, which are incredibly exciting. So a huge thank you to the FT. And so this evening's panel, when we were having a discussion about what type of event to put on, what we realized is that actually we have a lot of career changes at codebar. And actually, one thing we also found from the impact report is that 2/3 of people who come to codebar are a career changer. And so we thought, what better event to put on than a panel full of career changers? And so, like I said, this is your chance to ask them any question you have. So let's introduce themselves. So Polly, should we start with you? Would you like to introduce yourself and what it is that you do at the FT?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Polly. I am a senior product designer at the FT.
Thank you so much. People can just go next. So Andy, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Andy. I'm a software engineer at the FT. Yeah, I say software engineer, probably better described as a web developer at the FT.
I'm happy to go next. I'm Cynthia. I'm a software engineer at the FT, and I joined back in March this year.
I'm Ania, pronouns she, her, and I'm a software engineer, and I've been at the FT for 3 years and a bit.
I'll go next. I'm Marjan. I'm relatively new to the FT, about going into my 4th month, and I'm a software engineer as well in the ads and privacy team.
Perfect. Thank you so much for those introductions. So I guess it would be really nice to also get to know what it is that you all did before the FT. So could each of you go through and tell us what it was that you did before you became, your current role at the FT, and then also your journey to where it is that you've got to today? And anyone can go first.
Well, I can kick off. I worked in publishing for a little bit, and then I also worked in marketing. So I was an SEO manager at an e-commerce company called THG.
For myself, I trained and qualified as a hospital pharmacist in the NHS and worked as a hospital pharmacist for 8+ years. Before in the pandemic, that sort of led me to learning how to code and then making that career switch, but can go into more of that later. But that's my background.
I was a musician. I spent about 50% of my time teaching and about 50% of my time gigging and composing and things. And I also changed career in the pandemic, or started to. I used that time to do lots of learning online. And yeah, that led me to the FT.
I haven't really had a career per se, just done a bunch of office jobs that paid the bills, and one of them gave me opportunity to do a little bit of coding, and I discovered that actually when you can write a piece of code that saves a human so many hours, it can change the world. And I thought, you know what, I could do that. I could get into coding and try to change the world one code line at a time.
Similar to Anya, I didn't really have a, quote unquote career. I did work in sales in a tech company beforehand, which sort of led me into the tech industry as a whole, but I wasn't particularly good at it. So I decided I just wanted to stay in tech. But in order to stay in tech, I needed to be in tech. And yeah, that's sort of what led me here.
Perfect. Thank you. So based on any of that, if anyone does have any questions for any of our panelists, please do drop them in the chat. You can either ask a question to everyone, or you can ask a specific question to someone. Either are, or both are totally okay. So one thing I'm really intrigued about is what made you want a career in tech? Because it's such a big decision to go, do you know what, I'm going to completely career change and now go into tech. So I'm really intrigued as to know why tech, what it was that intrigued you about it. I can see faces thinking. Anyone can go first.
I think, yeah, having
Go first?
no.
Oh,
Sorry, go on.
you go
Okay,
ahead.
like having had no career before, it's sort of like people have a career, people, you know, have career as their identity, and it's, you know, I'm not going to say that's good, but it's nice to have a niche that you can say, this is my career. And I like problem solving, I like helping people, I like building stuff, and it feels that coding kind of combines all these things together, and you know, it definitely pays the bills as well, so that's, you know, makes a big difference as well, coming from working in charity sector, for example. Marjan.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really have a niche either, and I wanted something that I can kind of build on top of and just kind of get into. So being in a tech company to begin with anyway sort of helped. So I could see what other people within the company were doing. I was like, oh, I kind of want to do that. And then I went into a lot of events that got me even more interested. So like women in tech events or AI in medicine, which I have a bit of a background in psychology, which is what interested me in that area as well. And it just sort of solidified my want to stay in technology, but actually specifically work in technology.
Mine wasn't particularly profound. I just enjoyed it as a kid. And when I was unhappy in my career and COVID came along and I had an opportunity to try something else, I just dipped my toe in and did some learning and really enjoyed it. And I think retrospectively, the things that make me really love my job in tech is that I'm creating things and I'm problem solving. And I really enjoy learning as well. And tech is one where, you know, there's endless things to learn. So it's always interesting.
Yeah, there is definitely always so much to learn.
I think for me, I definitely thought that UX design was really cool. That was a fundamental part of it, I won't lie. But I also felt like it would be great to be able to create things. When I was working in marketing, I really missed being able to make stuff. And learning the design software, it also just seemed very exciting, and I like learning new things. And I think the opportunity to work in different sectors, because if you work in publishing like I did previously, I feel like there are certain companies that you would work for, whereas in tech you can work in fintech or e-commerce, or, you know, I've worked in lots of different sectors now, so I feel like it's quite rewarding in that way.
For myself, I think, I don't know if anyone on the call works in the NHS, but like I found it's kind of like you go into uni and you study pharmacy or any other healthcare related role, for example, and you're sort of pigeonholed as like, okay, you're a pharmacist and that's all you'll do. And there, I think as I moved up the ladder, there was actually one opportunity to lead on like a digital transformation project that kind of opened my eyes, being like, oh, I can be something else but a pharmacist. And again, no shade to pharmacy at all. Like they do an amazing job, but it just opened my eyes to something that I never thought I could do something else. And my university didn't like, we didn't have digi health or health tech. At least it wasn't really big back then. Not that I'm particularly old, but so I think when an opportunity arose for me to sort of explore like digi health or like things like that, I found it quite interesting. And then yeah, I think the main reason was just tech is, I found it quite liberating, and it was just so starkly different from my experience in the hospitals I was working in, where they had quite archaic or clunky infrastructure, legacy software that nothing talked to each other. Everything was like, most things would be manual, paper based, and it's just like, I shouldn't be having to do the same task 3 times over. So I found actually problem solving with tech and the possibilities of what it could open up. I found that quite liberating and really fun. So that was sort of my main motivator.
Oh, I love the answers. So from the moment you decided I want this career to then landing your first job, what was your learning journey like? Did any of you do boot camps? Did you go self-taught? Did you do any online courses? Like what was it that you used to help you get to where you are now? Anyone could go.
I'm happy to go. So
Yeah.
for me, it involved lots of online. So I didn't do a boot camp or go back to uni to do a computer science master's. I was completely self-taught, just because at the time I just either didn't have the funds or the time to be able to step away from work to do that because it is a massive commitment. So, and obviously because it was COVID, nothing was happening. So I'd go to work, I'd come home, and social life was basically gone. So I ended up just using the evenings to like code, and I'd find free resources online. So I know a couple of people have put in the chat about like resources and things, but I found free code camp really, really useful. And that will sort of take you through like coding modules. So I found that quite helpful for me. So you start off with like the web design aspects, which is quite nice, being like, oh, I just coded something and it did something there, and that's quite satisfying. And then as I developed, I was getting more and more into like the web dev side, trying my hand with data structures and algorithms. But I think at the time of when I was first learning, I think it was a bit ahead of me. Again, maybe because I didn't necessarily have the computer science background. But yeah, it mostly was going to work, coming home, going on free code camp in the evenings, using that to study, joining online communities as well, getting involved in like hackathons, which was so much fun. I think that probably also made me realize how much tech is. It's just a fun space. So get involved in hackathons, getting involved in online communities, online events, like things like this. I just got really stuck in. So that was sort of like what that whole process looked like for me. So yeah, I'll pass on to someone else there.
I was really fortunate in the sense that I worked for this tech company that had all the different departments in-house. And so I was an SEO manager, and I knew that I wanted to be a designer because I'd worked with UX designers. And I started to think about how I could possibly move over internally, which I realize isn't an option for everyone. But I did a lot of research. I did a lot of reading about design. I spoke to some of the UX designers who worked at the company. And I also joined a lot of networking groups. There are loads. I was living in Manchester at the time, and there were loads of really brilliant ones. And eventually I worked out that I could use the skills that I had as an SEO manager to be a UX researcher. And that was kind of the first step. So I guess I kind of looked at the skills that I had and thought, how can I get closer to UX design? And because I had the analytical skills, research was a natural next step. And then after that, and this was a bit that was quite scary, but I put in a meeting with the head of UX and kind of pitched myself and said, I think I can learn quickly, and this is what I can do at the moment. And he took a chance on me. And I just started as a junior UX researcher in that team internally. So yeah, it's not, I think, a common situation necessarily, but I didn't do a boot camp. And I was very fortunate that I didn't have to sort of pay to learn. There was that opportunity in-house that I went for.
I love that you just like sent the message and was like, right, I know I can do this, like give me a chance. Like I love that.
My journey was a bit more up and down. So when I first did the little coding thing, I was working for a charity. So I thought, what can I do to get more into tech? So I tried applying for tech support roles, I ended up getting a job which was sort of joined tech support and office support. I tried distance learning, master's conversion course for computer science. I did maybe a couple of semesters to decide it's not for me. I just found it such a big jump in what they taught you in first semester to then what they expect you to know in second semester. And it just not how my brain works. And I thought, I've tried the like various tech courses in the past, the ones you have on Coursera and MIT, but I found you do one module and the next module is just so disjointed that I really struggled to put them in a sort of linear learning fashion. So I thought, well, they have founders and coders. So this is a boot camp in London. I believe it's free of charge, but there are some strings attached to it that they later put you on. I believe placements after you finish, and it's all self-taught and peer-taught. So I thought, oh, I'll do prerequisites for that, see where that goes. So I did the prerequisites, I got the interview, and in the end, they asked, oh, are you willing to commute to London? So I'm based just north of Cambridge, and I said, actually, I don't feel like commuting to London afterwards. So they declined based on that. And it so happened that somebody else who was applying for the same cohort, so we're on the same Slack, said, oh, a buddy of mine is setting up a coding bootcamp from scratch. It's cheaper than Makers or whatever other big coding bootcamps. Go and talk to him. So I did go and talk to that person, joined the bootcamp for 12 weeks. The bootcamp is no longer running. I think it ran for a total of 3 cohorts and run out of funding. And after that, actually before the coding bootcamp, I had a job that promised to teach me coding on the job, and it was about a week of follow this tutorial online and then you're on your own. So yes, I agree, Kim. That was very frustrating. And even the first job that I had out of coding bootcamp, once again, they were like, "Oh yeah, we have this wonderful junior track," and the least said the better, but it was not as promised. And it wasn't until I joined the FT in January 2020 that I found the nurturing and supportive environment that kind of helped me figure things out and put it into place. So that's it. It was quite a roller coaster as well, and I think quite a few what you could consider failures as well. So I think out of that, if you try JavaScript and it's not working for your brain, do try other languages, because Python in my brain, I understand it, I struggle writing it, but JavaScript is a very, super easy. So that's my recommendation.
So I was self-taught as well. I just did a few free courses online over lockdown, and then in between, when things opened up again and I was back to work, I tried to drop some of my work so I had more time just to focus on studying, and I took my laptop everywhere with me, and every few minutes I'd always open it and just get cracking with it. And then the other thing in lockdown, which I didn't do intentionally for this reason, but I was just getting in touch with a lot of my old friends. It was, we were all locked up, and it was easy to Zoom people, even if they were halfway across the world. And I told people what I was doing, and luckily, like a few people who I didn't realize were even in tech, or people who knew people in tech, were able to hook me up with some opportunities of like very informal internships, just people with startups who needed someone to come and help out a little bit. So I did a few of those, and I didn't always contribute very much. And some of it was less than ideal because it was with tech that I knew nothing about, but I just gave it a go. And every one of those gave me like a small thing I could put on my CV, which was actually quite valuable. And then I got a short stay at an e-card company. I worked as a web developer there, but when I joined, they'd already told me that they were thinking of just folding the company. And my job was to put together some dashboards and things with their data to see if there was any way they could make more money or cut spending and things. But that was a very short job. But that gave me enough on my CV where I could start applying. I'd sent out hundreds and hundreds of CVs on LinkedIn and stuff, and most people didn't respond, but a few people did, and yeah, eventually I got the job at the FT.
Nice. Is that everyone answered that question? No. Yeah.
I'll just go now.
Yeah.
Quickly. My journey was actually very fortunately quite straightforward, which I appreciate is not going to be the case for everybody, but I pretty much Googled a company I'd heard of and career change into tech. And for some reason, in the luck that I had, they were doing a pilot scheme where they were essentially doing like an apprenticeship for career changers and people who are graduates. And they paid for us to do a boot camp. So I joined Makers, and yeah, I did 3 months of boot camp before I then joined the company to work as a software engineer. So it was a very, very lucky experience for me. But I do think a lot of my learning came on the job more so than boot camp wise. So I feel like if you're self-taught and that sort of thing, you're going to be in just as good a position anyway. And I don't think a boot camp is necessary to get into technology. So yeah.
I love that everyone has quite different ways of coming in. You know, some of you have done boot camps, some completely self-taught, some internally with work. So I love it because we're going to have real different perspectives, which I think are really amazing about, you know, these types of panels. So we've got a lot of questions coming in, which is great. So what were the biggest challenges you faced during your career transition?
I think imposter syndrome at first, for sure. I remember starting and being given a MacBook on day one and sitting with the design team and having never used a MacBook before and feeling like, do I deserve this? Can I do this? But in terms of the actual transition, I think probably just doubting that it's possible and thinking, you know, I did an English degree and marketing and publishing was just so natural. So yeah, I think doubt and imposter syndrome for sure were the biggest barriers in reality. Like there weren't huge obstacles in my way to switching internally.
I think similar things for me. One thing was feeling like I was in a very small bubble. I didn't really know anyone in the tech world, or at least I didn't think I did. I slowly realized I knew a few people, but I didn't have anyone to sort of say, what do you think of these ideas? Is this viable? Will I be able to get a job? And ask all those questions too. And then, yeah, just the self-doubt, because it took me a long time of studying by myself and investing so much into it and not knowing, will I get a job out of this? Is this the right move? It can be really hard to deal with that. And I also personally struggled quite a lot with just rejection when applying for jobs. Found that quite tough when you get through to like the final stage. It really meant so much to me to get that job, and when you don't get it, it's like it's a real blow.
I think for me, what I struggled with is the first few jobs. There's when you're learning, there's the innermost comfort zone, which like you know everything, you can do it. Then there's the growth zone, which is I don't know how to do it, but I know enough to, with some help, do it. And there's a sort of outer zone of I haven't got a clue where to start. You might as well ask me to do something totally out of, you know, out of like ask me to do a surgery on someone with no relevant knowledge. And I found that the first few jobs were either this very center thing of the stuff that I knew how to do, or the very outer thing of the stuff that I haven't got a clue where to start. Because like to grow, you need to be in that growth zone, and it's actually only at the FT that I found a consistent source of growth zone material tasks.
Sure. Does anyone else have anything to add, or should we move to the next question?
I'd say the question is like, what did we find most of the struggle?
The biggest challenge.
Biggest challenge. I think for me, my biggest challenge was definitely like getting myself ready to leave the NHS space and mentally thinking. So like, for example, when you're in the NHS, you don't really need a CV, quote unquote, like you don't really have a LinkedIn because your application just lives in the NHS portal and you will just go between hospitals or like organizations that way. So I think for me, the biggest challenge was like, oh, I actually have to like do a proper CV and not just like do the CV, but word it in a way that is like makes sense to like the private sector. And that was probably the biggest challenge of like having to rethink all the different experiences I've done in my workplace and using like the right words for it, so that you get tracked back better on LinkedIn. When obviously CVs, they go when you apply for something, some companies use like scanning software, things like that, to get you using the right words, so it gets picked up in scanning. And so that was probably the biggest challenge for me, just realizing I guess the that initial effort needed to put into building up my CV and in my LinkedIn. But then the thing is, though, and I got lots of support from my friend, like people, either my friends or those in my network, who are in the private sector. They're either in like work at Amazon or they work in consulting. So they were able to be like, can you please help me look at my CV? Because I don't know necessarily know how I should be wording this. And they were really great in terms of structuring it and making it be impactful and helping to take my experiences and being like, I hear what you've done. So it sounds like you've actually done this, and being able to word that. And it's like, oh yeah, like that makes sense. I just didn't realize that's what you guys call that in the private sector. Like we do a lot of quality improvement in the NHS, but trying to word that in a non-waffly way that's impactful and has quantitative data to like back it up. It's not really something we would do. So that's probably was the biggest challenge. But because I've gone through that, I think there's so much benefit in making sure your LinkedIn is on point, your CV as well. Like just there's so much power in that because it is like a digital version of you. And you'll find that I found interesting opportunities have come by through making my LinkedIn like really fleshed out.
Sounds really amazing to have that support network around you that we're able to go, no, these skills are transferable. You just need to word them differently. And that's often, I have so many, conversations with people who are career changing about that, because they often think that none of their skills are transferable. And actually, often most of them are. You just need to change how it's worded to be more relevant to tech than, retail or NHS or, some other career. Anything else on that question before Marjan, to you?
Yeah, I think what I would say my biggest challenge was not knowing how to know what I didn't know. So for me, like, especially very early on in my journey, I was following tutorials like most people do and watching those YouTube videos that give you a step-by-step guide. And for some reason or another, mine wouldn't work. And I wouldn't know why. I wouldn't know how to debug. I wouldn't know what I was doing. And then I realized after many attempts with this, that it was just a lack of core understanding of what I was actually doing to begin with. So then that was the difference between me as someone who was learning on the cuff and then also at a boot camp versus someone with a computer science degree who has all that theory and background taught to them. I didn't have that, and I needed to find a way to then understand that better and get that structure in order to be able to progress. So that was a big struggle for me. Also, obviously, imposter syndrome, and my live coding skills were horrendous. Like I would be able to do something by myself fine, but as soon as it was in front of somebody else, I'd be like, someone would ask me, oh, what's an array? Who knows? What's, I don't know, an input? I don't know. What is a terminal? Where do you go? No idea. Is this my computer? Who is to know? I don't know. So that took a lot of work. So if you're not good at live coding, don't worry about it. It'll come with time.
You know what? I've been a developer now 10 years and I still absolutely hate having to do any like live coding, my mind just goes blank. And exactly like you said, I'm just like, well, what's my name? Like everything I know just goes, and I'm just a bubble on the floor. I'm just a mess. We started to touch on it in some of the responses to that question, but I think it'd be really interesting to know, you know, you get to a certain level when you're particularly like going down the self-taught route. How do you know at what point to then start applying for jobs? Like when did you feel ready, and at what point? Because I think that is incredibly difficult. So I know with a boot camp there's a bit more structure, right? You do the boot camp, they start to help you. The natural progression is then to go, now you apply. But self-taught is a lot more tricky. So for those who went down the self-taught route, how did you know when you were ready?
Long story short, you don't.
Fair.
You don't know when you're ready. So you just, I mean, I'd probably say in terms of structure, maybe have at least one, from a coding at least point of view. I know there are others on the call who might be interested in other areas of tech, but actually this probably even would apply even for designers, but like have something like a project that you've worked on to demonstrate, so that you can, you know, if you may have gotten into maybe a grad scheme or a junior engineer role, at least you have something that you can talk on saying, oh, I built this, or I designed this, or this is something in my portfolio. And you don't have to have a full portfolio, but at least something. So at the point of when I was applying, I built some HTML and CSS websites, and like they weren't necessarily the most prettiest things, but it showed that I'm learning, I'm able to apply myself, and I was able to complete a task, and I can talk about what I've learned in the process. But long story short, there is no like after 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, 12 months, because everyone's different. And also I feel if you wait for this golden time, there is never a golden time. You just have to try. And worst case scenario is that someone says, no, sorry, not yet, which does hurt. But you might just find that you apply and you get a break, and that completely changes everything, and you get your foot in the door. So yeah.
I definitely didn't know when I was ready or not. And when I got what I would call my first real job in the industry, I was only a junior developer for like a couple of months before I got promoted to a mid-level, which makes me realize that, you know, I was probably ready to start applying a long time before I did. And people always recommend, you know, just start applying as soon as possible. You get experience of the interviews, you learn a bunch of things, you learn what you need to learn. And I think that's really valid. And I would have definitely, if I was doing it again, I would do that. But also the other thing on my mind was weighing up. Applying is very time consuming, and I didn't want to spend ages applying and getting rejected for months when I could have maybe invested that time learning. So it was really difficult to know. But it worked out fine for me. But I could have probably, I could have probably got a job much sooner. And I do really recommend just dipping your toe in and seeing what response you get.
I think what you said there is really valuable, because actually, even if you don't get the job, which you're probably not going to, you know, in your first few, but actually all of them, you're building up all this experience. So in that previous interview, you can look back and go, oh, okay, they asked me that question, and actually I know I didn't answer it that well. So if I get asked it again, I'll respond with this. So actually just use each of them as like a learning curve. I think that's, and the rejection is hard, like no one likes it, but actually, you know, try and change your mindset, like you said, Andy, to be like, actually, with every single one here, I'm going to get better, because I'm going to get better at interviewing. Anything else to add on that? Oh, so someone's asked about, so, and Cynthia, you touched on this as well in your previous answer around those transferable skills and how you portrayed them on your new CV to your tech team. Is there any that you can talk about direct, like, you know, and you know, this goes to anyone as well, but is there any that you can say, give us a direct example of one of those transferable skills that you put on, and how you changed the terminology from your previous career to, you know, your new one in tech?
Of course, I'm on mute. Yes, absolutely. So if I think back to, so for example, so when I was, and again, these are transferable from, so like, even as something like, let me take a step back. So in my experience, I've sort of done things where I've taken on education, like learning and education roles, with like either teaching or training, like nurses and doctors and other pharmacists, to on the ward rounds, having to balance all the different myriad of tasks that we're having to do, quality improvement projects, and then as moving up to a junior manager, having to like lead sort of the medicine safety like element of my hospital. And in each of those different aspects, like I guess the main thing is you have to think about what is the task at hand, and specifically what have you done. So I find it's quite helpful to use the STAR method, and some of you may have heard it, STARR, which is describe the situation, what was the task that you specifically had to do, what was your specific action, what was the result. So again, you want to quantify that. So you want to say led to 10% X, or led a workshop for 50 people or something or other. So you want to quantify that. And then if it makes sense to, the final R will be reflection, but that probably makes more sense in an interview setting than your CV or LinkedIn, for example. So everything can be transferable. Obviously, you want to think about skills that make sense to what you're applying to. So from the point of view of like, so from a coding point of view, like on my one, I've got things around like teamwork, leadership, sort of taking ownership over a piece of work, being able to translate like ambiguous information to and distilling it to others in a way that's really clear, which again, like in coding, you're basically working with ambiguous information all the time. And then having to communicate complicated stuff in a straightforward, non-jargon way, to others so that they can also understand it. And as you move up, you're having to teach juniors or others, also your peers. So like there are so many ways that you can transfer. If you, again, it does take a bit of an art, and you know, again, definitely reach out, and I'm happy to chat through. And I know, imagine the team at codebar are also happy to do this, but like it's definitely like it's difficult to give like specific transferable skills because everyone's skill set's going to be different. But I think using the STAR method was definitely helpful for me. And yeah, the STAR method was definitely the most helpful for me to sort of structure that. And again, when my either my friends or those in my network were going through my CV, they also like were structuring it in that way as well, because that's just what makes sense in the private sector and like the business speak. I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a specific example. Bum, 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 bum. So like, so yeah, so like one I had was when I was the medicine safety officer for my hospital. I developed and wrote a 5-year trust-wide strategy. And from that, again, I was thinking, okay, I wrote a strategy, but like, what was the impact of that? So the impact of that, it led to like X percentage of increase in engagement and staff in these different areas. So like maybe they're reporting more incidents with medicines, for example. I have quantifiable data to prove that the strategy I put in place actually led to impact, and it like improved like the positive medicine safety culture, things like that. But you can apply it to so many different things. If you're doing teaching, you created a workshop and you were able to teach it to X number of people. So again, that shows that you can, you know, deliver information to a wide number of audience and capture their attention. Maybe you also gave out a survey at the end of it, and you can demonstrate led a workshop with X number of people that led to staff like a satisfaction rating of X, for example. Again, it's just how you word it to demonstrate impact. Hopefully that's helpful.
Does anyone else want to add anything?
Yeah, I think the STAR method that Cynthia mentioned for answering questions is really key when you're trying to put together examples. For me, I think having worked in search engine optimization, I had done a few things that I could try and make relevant to UX research. So, for example, I ran surveys to try and create infographics for the sites that I was managing. And running surveys and being able to write non-leading questions is a big part of UX research if you're going to do a quant survey. So I try to pick out things like that. And also all the soft skills that Cynthia mentioned. So stakeholder management, being presentation skills, they were all things that I was also doing in marketing at the time. So I think it can be a bit panic inducing when you start thinking about it, because you automatically assume that nothing that you do is going to be relevant in that new sector. But if you go through it methodically and maybe have someone to bounce ideas off, I think it can really help. And there will be definitely 100% be things.
Anything else?
One small thing I'd add, I
Yeah.
don't know if this is obvious or not, but I wasn't aware what a competency interview was before I started having my interviews, because musicians don't really give each other competency interviews. But just Googling competency interview questions will give you so many valuable questions that you're likely to get asked something like in your interviews. And I spent ages just thinking about those, how I could just give some small answer of some sort of experience that I had to fit that, and that was really helpful. And also asking other people to give me like mock interviews, and often they were able to suggest ideas as well, saying like, well, you could mention that and this, which wasn't always obvious to me. So yeah.
I think for CVs, we often, the thing that people see on LinkedIn, it's name of company, date, what you've done, education. And actually what has served me really well is a skill-based CV. So the first page doesn't have your employers, it has your communication, the examples of communication skills. So, gave talk to so many people, or answered phones and queries, and technical skills, and whatever other broad categories that you can find. And then you can put things like relevant education, relevant jobs, just sort of if you want to actually mention any jobs that you think would actually feed into that job application. And in terms of CV, something that I found useful is the concept of action words. So developed, presented, Google the term action words, there's whole lists of them. But these are the sort of keywords that Cynthia mentioned that the softwares are designed to pick out. And yeah, it would be really good if you can think of how can I, the things I've done, how can I put them with action words, with concrete numbers, so that it sounds impressive.
Nice. Thank you for those incredibly useful answers. Polly, we have a question for you, which is, what tips would you give to someone wanting to get into UX as a beginner without attending a boot camp?
Yes, a very interesting question. Yeah, as I said, I didn't go to a boot camp, so I think there are a couple of things. I think there are amazing free resources that you can access online. So there's obviously Norman Nielsen, where you can go and look at all the sort of traditional UX research studies. There are also lots of brilliant articles by Jared Spool, who I still refer to when I'm struggling to sort of think about how to approach a project. So I'd really recommend any of his articles. I think joining UX communities. So there's one in London called Triangles that I think is awesome. And also Ladies at UX. I used to go to their meetups when I was in Manchester. I don't know how active they are in London. So having a community is really lovely, even if you're just on the Slack channel. I think also just being curious. A huge part of being a UX designer is being really curious about different products and different roles. And this sounds strange, but just talking to people that you know about what they do, and if they work in an interesting company, just digging into the details of their work processes. And I think that can be, I think that can help you to start thinking in a sort of design mindset. But yeah, I think there's a lot out there that's free. Obviously, you know, landing your first entry level role can be really difficult, and I appreciate that, you know, free resources might not give you absolutely everything, but there is so much out there. And you know, if anyone wants to chat to me on LinkedIn about it, please feel free to chat there, because I could try and think of a broader list of stuff that would be useful.
Thank you. We can share we'll get everyone to share their details at the end if they want to like connect on any socials. Cynthia, we've got a question for you, which is what skills / knowledge from your pharmacy career do you find most valuable in your current software engineer position today?
I would say communication. So, actually, a very pharmacy thing is attention to detail, and like having to be very meticulous, because obviously we're sort of like the last line before the patient gets the medicine. So there's a lot of like attention to detail and having to be meticulous so that you don't miss something. And I find that's been good for me, especially because especially when I was starting, and even to now, making sure that I fully understand like what I'm doing and why am I doing it. I'm not necessarily want to just say, well, that's how so and so told me. It's like I want to understand the why so that I know I'm doing it correctly. On the other hand, that can also backfire, because then you sort of get in this mindset of thinking, oh, everything has to be completely perfect before I do anything, which obviously makes sense when you're dealing with patients and medicines. But with code, like sometimes you just have to do it and then run it, and if it fails, okay, cool, you get errors, like no one's gonna die. So that's been like a learning process for me of like, it's okay to like just run stuff, and if it breaks, it's fine. I'd say, yeah, so sort of like having that meticulous like attention to detail, and then leadership and communication. So I've had a lot of that in my role, and that transfers very easily across. And being able to like create presentations and present them. I'm trying to think of what else specifically. Team building as well. So again, I've only just starting at the FT, just over my 6 months period now. So it's been really fun getting to like understand how the FT works. And I've spoken with my team about some fun ideas, like team stuff that we can do. But I think in terms of specifics, yeah, those are probably the ones I can imagine just off the top of my head. I can probably think a bit more about it. But yeah. If anything, I can share my socials and you can always reach out. I see that you're also potentially trying to get into making the transition from healthcare. So always happy to chat.
Thank you so much. The next question is for everyone. Were there any instances where you doubted yourself when you were, you know, career transitioning? And if so, how did you overcome it?
At least for myself, you really have to back your decision because you all have. So for me, so like my ethnic background, I'm Nigerian. So like my mom, she doesn't understand. Initially, she didn't really understand what I was doing because she just thought I was throwing away years worth of like training and education and exams to go and do. Well, she's like, you're just going to do computers. What does that mean? So she didn't really understand it. And there was a lot of trying to convince. And I think for her, she didn't really understand or appreciate like the risk involved. And it is quite risky. But if you've thought about it, you've looked at, you know, um, you've taken time to like do your research, ask right people, reach out to people on LinkedIn, find out what the job prospects are like, what the salary prospects are like. If you've done your research, you're making, you know, calculated risk, then it's fine. So yeah, that was probably the biggest thing of just self-doubt. And there were constant moments, even after I got the role. So like I applied to a grad scheme at a technology consulting company. And again, I found through like one of my online communities, Coding Black Females, and that's how I got my foot in the door into tech. And when I got the job, I was like over the moon. This is amazing. But then like a couple of weeks afterwards, it sort of settled on me, being like, I'm going to leave my very stable NHS job where like like I've got everything all set out and I know my progression, everything else. And it sort of weighed on me, being like, am I sure I really want to do this? So there will be moments, it will fluctuate, but you really have to be super grounded as to why you're doing it. And like that fire in your belly of like, yeah, know your why is probably my main thing, because you will have moments where you'll doubt and people might try to put doubt in your mind because of their own fear, or maybe they just don't understand or know why you're doing what you're doing. But yeah, you have to have super inner resolve.
Lovely. Who wants to go next?
I think, oh, sorry, Ania, do you want to go?
You go first.
I think I always had moments of doubt when people would mention UX buzzwords, like, I don't know, I think I remember someone talking about tree testing and just sitting in a meeting thinking, I don't know what that is, and someone's going to find out that I don't know what that is. And I think that what actually really helped me was just, you know, forming friendships with other UX designers in the team that I joined, because very often they would then know in meetings and kind of provide context, not in a really obvious way, but just they would make sure that I always knew what was going on. And I don't think that I would have learned so quickly had they not been really supportive. So I think, you know, when you're in situations where you feel uncertain about what's going on, speaking to other people in your team, if you feel like you have that level of trust, can be super helpful. So then they can help steer meetings so that people don't get left behind. I think that was a really, really helpful thing for me when I felt doubtful of my own abilities.
I think, as I said, it was quite a roller coaster for me. And when you read something and it says a variable or a lamp stack, so LAMP stack, and you go and ask, okay, what do you mean by variable and what do you mean by lamp stack? And they look at you and say, what do you mean what's a variable? It's a variable. What do you mean a lamp stack? It's a lamp stack. And you go, but I don't know. Can you elaborate? And they can't, because for them it's just so obvious. And you know, I kept trying various avenues, you know, the jobs that promised teach you on the job, and self-taught and university, and it didn't really work. And I think coding bootcamp was the right decision for me to have structured learning in which I can do things for somebody else and have somebody on hand who actually is capable to say, actually, variable, it's, you know, it's this. Or lamp stack, well, it's an acronym of A, B, C, D, you know, LAMP in this case. This is for databases, this is the front end, this is the back end. And it make a big, big difference. And I think the biggest self-doubt is like, is there any problem? Can I actually make it into tech with all these obstacles that I'm encountering? And I think between finding the right environment and the right language, yes, I can make it. Because yeah, I've been very successful in for several years. So if one avenue doesn't work out, don't discount it. Figure out that like you might have a different learning style and see whether you can find something that fits into that learning style.
Who wants to go next? Marjan, do you have anything?
Sure. For me, I think the main imposter syndrome and the doubt hit when I first started working in tech. And I just, as soon as I didn't know something, I would struggle, because I used to be the type of person which was like, if I'm not good at this straight away, there is no point. And I wasn't good at this straight away, but there was a point, and that point is me being here now, which is nice. But it took me a long time of self-reflection and working on it to get there. But what I think the main thing I would remind myself is you're not hired for fun. They're not just going to pay you a salary for fun just because, you know, they like you or whatever. They need to think that you can do this. And if they have enough faith in you, then maybe you should as well. And that's something that I would constantly remind myself when I was feeling super self-conscious or feeling imposter syndrome or doubt about my transition. But then also, which this sounds really ridiculous, but note making. I forgot, even though I was in academia for 5 years, that you could take notes, and that really helps. And I love taking notes now. I have like so many different folders of notes, and every time I think, okay, this is something I've not heard of before, pop it in the notes, and then I now know it. So yeah, you can always take notes.
Andy, do you have anything to add?
I'm not sure. I kind of. I think it's quite possible to be quite to believe in yourself and be determined and think you can do it, and still also self-doubt definitely creeps in. And maybe I'm wrong, I'm not sure, but I think it's like it's very normal that it will happen. And I think sometimes it can be useful in a way, in that, you know, it's a huge thing to change career, and worrying about it a little is probably all right in terms of it made me work very hard, and, you know, it made me think of all the things I could do. I don't know if that's good advice or not. Obviously, you want to really believe in yourself, and you know it's possible. There's a bunch of people here who have done it, and if you work hard, you know, it's achievable. But yeah, I think I don't know how I overcame it, because I think I did believe in myself, and I think I was very determined, but at the same time, you know, there were moments where I hugely doubted I was doing the right thing. I just wasn't sure. You can't be 100% sure, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a huge life change, isn't it, that there's bound to be doubts at some point. Now, you know, once you've got the job, you know, tech is a very fast-paced industry. You know, one thing I always say to people is you're never going to know everything, so don't even try. But once you're in the job, how do you then find the time to stay up to date with tech? You know, whether it's frameworks, trends, you know, Polly, you may be able to talk about, you know, the design side of it as well. But yeah, like, how do you find the time to stay up to date with it all?
Not a very helpful answer. I don't bother, because when Twitter was still vaguely sensible place, then I kind of, you know, you hear about new things, so I kind of just picked things up. And since whatever December last year, that kind of fizzled out. I'm not paying attention to that. Anything that is of importance and people will share on their work Slacks, on your tech communities. So, you know, the main language at FT is JavaScript. So there's JavaScript guild, there's TypeScript guild. If people have news, then people post said news. If there's a conference talk that they've seen and it's recorded, they post a recording. They, you know, share articles, and you know, we have loads of wonderful teams, reliability team, platforms team. It's kind of, they pay attention to the new things and then they come and talk to us. Okay, these are the shiny new features coming in the next node release. So yeah, that's kind of how I keep up to date, because realistically, the skill you need is not the specific framework or language. You need to learn how to read the docs and implement them, and it's it's a skill that I think many people don't value or see as kind of, oh yeah, we all read the docs, we're going to, you know, if you need to put the docs together, you know, write something that vaguely makes sense to you, but actually you can make it by reading the docs. And yes, some are better than the others, but generally, if you need to pick something up from scratch, if you have a vague idea where to start, then the docs, Stack Overflow, YouTube, you can pick that up, you know, relatively quickly as needed. And I certainly found that, yeah, there's so many things, and you can say, oh, I want to do AWS certifications, but then you do AWS certifications and you don't use it, and that knowledge kind of, certainly for me, I need to use it to remember it. So I don't see much point in learning in advance. So there's so many, you know, machine learning, AI, AWS, all the buzzwords, frameworks. It's like, unless I need it in 2-3 months' time, you know, it's good to know they exist. It's good to know where to find information. Other than that, I don't bother keeping up with the trends, because if it's a really big trend, it will find me.
I totally agree. I think tech is so big that like you can't follow it all. And yeah, I used to have the same at work. We would have a Slack, and you know, we would all share stuff there. So that's how I would, you know, stay up to date. Anybody else?
I think designers love talking about design tools. So chatting with sort of ex-colleagues or my team at the moment is quite a good way of figuring out what new tool is good. But yeah, to be honest, I think a lot of, if I'm being totally honest, a lot of, you know, the time when I find something new, it's because I've needed to do something, and then I do some Googling, and then I find a couple of options or an article that compares different ways of doing something, and that's how I tend to pick up new skills. Or, you know, like this morning, I have a WhatsApp group with some of my ex-colleagues, and I just put a kind of scenario to them and said, you know, if you were asked to do this thing, is this how you would approach it? And we very often share stuff like that on WhatsApp, just to kind of bounce ideas off each other, which is really nice. And it just, yeah, it, you know, it's just familiar when you've got a group of people that you can share stuff like that with.
Oh, I love that WhatsApp group. I love it.
For myself, I am a visual learner. So I find YouTube is my absolute best friend, and it actually helped a lot when I was learning how to code and go over like computer science concepts. But for me, if I'm trying to stay on top of what's going on, I've just got a few YouTubers that I watch. And oh, what's his name? Fire something.io. I can't remember his name now, but he's very fast on like what's new in tech and trending. So if it's a new framework, a new language, Fireship.io, that's I think something or other like that. He's great. So that's sort of how I stay up to date with what's going on, is via YouTube. And I think, yeah, that's mostly the main one. I mean, we've got our Slack channels at the FT as well, where people might just post if they're doing like a personal project, or again, like as Ania mentioned, like my specific team, I'm on the reliability team, so we do just have to know so much stuff, and that will end up filtering down, I guess, with like, yeah, letting teams know about there's a new update with this with Node or so that's quite cool. But yeah, in terms of personal, be YouTube.
And in terms of how do you find time, it took me a while to realize that it's just part of your job. And sometimes when I could do something very quickly and get it done, it's actually, you know, it's okay just to take a bit more time, learn a bit more thoroughly what's going on. And I don't know how normal this is, but at the Financial Times, we have a 10% time, which means 10% of our time we're working on a project of our choosing, so we can learn new things and experiment with new technologies, I guess, to see if any of it would benefit the FT or our team, and some really cool projects come out of that. And yeah, it's just a good way for us to learn new things. And also just asking questions, and software engineers, well, the ones I know love talking about new technologies that help them. So you just hear about it day to day. It's your job. You spend your whole time doing it.
Marjan, do you want to add anything?
Not much more to add, to be honest. I think, yeah, before I came to the FT, which has great Slack channels and obviously Cynthia's team is who I rely on. Irony intended, not irony, pun intended. But before moving to the FT, I did, read Medium articles and follow blogs and, follow YouTubers and stuff to keep up to date with new tech. But then it just got so overwhelming. It's so hard to be able to keep up that it's nice to now have areas where you can just pop in and have a look at and be like, oh, what's new? Someone is going to mention it in one of the Slack channels, and then you're good to go, really, and delve into it later if you feel like it.
Yeah, nice. One thing I started doing was actually blocking out the time in my calendar. And I guess if the FT, you have the 10% time, you know when it happens. But because I don't work for a company, I just work for myself and codebar. I always found that if I'd find an article, I'd just read it. Or if I saw a talk, I'd just watch it. But I never really found that I set aside a time to do those things. So now every Friday at 11 o'clock for an hour, it's in my calendar as an event, and it's called Learning Hour. And I save, if there's something I see in the week that I'm like, oh, I want to read that article, but it's come from a newsletter, an email, or something, and I forget. And I just add it to this bookmark now. And then on my Friday hour, I go and I'm like, oh, what things shall I look through today? So I actually added it as an event in my calendar. And it also means that, if anyone's ever tried to speak to me, they'll know that I use a Calendly link. It actually means that you can't book me in that hour. I'm just not free because it is blocked out as an event. And then I make sure it happens. So that's what I do. And it's actually, it's helped me just make sure that I do it. Because I'd find that I'd just then forget these articles, and they'd end up as tabs. Then you just forget them, and then it's just never ending, and then it just becomes overwhelming. So I actually have it as an event now in my calendar every Friday at 11 a.m. for an hour. It's called Friday Learnings.
One other thing I wanted to add to that in terms of how to keep up to date, not just the YouTube, but podcasts are my absolute fave.
Yeah.
And I love learning just things in the background if I'm doing tasks or traveling, or chores. So again, there are so many really, really great tech podcasts out there. And there's like bite-sized ones that are like 5 minutes long, and they should just give you the headlines of what's going like hot in tech right now, news, drama. And there's other ones that are a bit more like meatier, and they can go into like the deep dives of like what's going on with like big companies or startups, or maybe more techie ones, like dev related ones, engineering ones. So I've found podcasts have also helped me a lot in terms of keeping up with what's hot, what's going on, and keeping abreast of everything as well.
Are there any you can think of off the top of your head now?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just gonna bring up my Spotify.
No, I love it. I'm also a big fan of podcasts. So they're really good if you're like walking the dog. I've got a dog, so when I walk her, I've literally always got just like one AirPod in. So
so a couple techish, so they're really cool, and they'll do like pop culture with tech in mind. I quite have an interest obviously in health tech, so there's the health tech podcast, and that's really cool. The change log, so that's more like dev related, but they'll talk about things about like Linux, the CLI, so like the command line and stuff like that, or like platform engineering, what does that mean, or DevOps and things like that. There are so many. I also interested in like startup space, like Y Combinator. They've also got their own tech podcast, and then they'll give you hints and tips about that. Stack Overflow have got a podcast. Free Code Camp's got a podcast. There's so many of them. And these are just like great ways again to just keep up to date. Software Daily is another one. That's really great for like meaty dev stuff, and it's like normally about an hour, but it's like really good meaty engineering stuff. But yeah,
I was just looking at my list. The Diary of a CEO is quite a good one. That's like not necessarily directly tech related, but it talks a lot about like people's journeys and careers. And but I think with CEOs, it's interesting because you hear their failures, which I'm a huge advocate for failures and failing. And I love hearing like Airbnb, and actually how it wasn't Airbnb. And actually the reason why they wanted it is because they basically go into San Francisco and they didn't have money to pay for hotels. They just wanted to stay on in a friend's spare room. And then they were like, I wonder how many people have spare rooms that they could just rent out, but then it failed. And yeah, I'm a fan of that one. So yeah, podcasts are a great shout. Someone's asked, what does a typical day look like for you work-wise?
I think it can vary quite a lot, which is not a good answer, but perhaps a typical day, if I think about something last week, so some research sessions. So because I work on internal tools, I might go and sit with some of the people in the newsroom, so journalists, watch what they're doing, so do what we call field studies, which is just sitting with people and looking at the tools, and probably some stakeholder meetings. So keeping, I guess, senior people up to date on how projects are going. And then some work, something that is quite difficult actually. The longer you work in design, it seems, is carving out actual design time. I'm sure you find this with engineering as well, but having some like solo time to work on projects without meeting interruptions. So having to be quite careful with your calendar. But yeah, I think an ideal day for me definitely involves a bit of research because I love sitting with people and talking about their problems, what they find difficult, and how then thinking about how I can solve them.
Who wants to go next?
I'll go for it. I think
Yeah.
everyone's sitting because it is so varied. It's really hard to sum up. The main two things I probably do are I'm either fixing something or creating a new feature, or collaborating on creating a new feature. But there are loads of other things that we do as well. So I get involved with a bit of user research sometimes, or just planning what the team's going to do next, what we need to work on. Yeah, but most of the time, yeah, fixing something or creating something.
Anybody else? No. Cool. Next.
Sorry.
Oh,
A typical day, sorry.
yes.
Typical day. So I'm on the reliability team, and basically my team, our main role is to ensure that the ft.com and our various apps don't go down. And if they do go down, we'll help support with the incident process. But then more primarily, it's like after the incident has sort of died down, we're thinking, okay, how can we prevent this from happening again so that our users never have to see a sorry page? We want everyone to always have like a great experience on the FT. So a large part of our role is like looking, like if something does happen, how can we put more alerting or monitoring so we can catch it quicker? And also just making, like, you can, like, it's like, how long is a piece of string? You can always make something more reliable, further optimize it, not just optimizing for the sake of optimizing. And then also, like, a typical day we'll have stand up. We have stand up every day. It's not about 15 minutes, and we have 3 engineers. So myself and the senior engineer and our tech lead, a delivery manager and our product manager, and it's a team of us is 5. And once we've done stand up, we have team mobbing twice a week. So that's essentially where us as engineers will kind of come together around a problem and we'll like pair on it together. So one person will be driving, so they'll be the one coding and sharing their screen, and the others will all basically be problem solving together. And the theory behind this is that you're actually able to solve the problem faster because you have more heads bouncing off of G's and like thinking about different ways to solve the problem rather than just like you cracking your head for hours by yourself. And then yeah, once you have stand up, we get assigned tickets on this software called Jira, which is like a ticket, like a task management platform. And you basically just get the rest of the day to then sort of work through your ticket. And if it's from a coding point of view, just yeah, working through the task and then shipping your code, getting it code reviewed. And then once it gets merged into like the main FT code, you can mark that ticket as done. And then you can pick up any extracurricular activities as well. So it's quite varied, and I've quite enjoyed learning. So like scripting, like writing scripts, like automation scripts. I've never done that before till I came to the FT, and it's so much fun. Because like Ania was mentioning, you realize so many things you do manually, and you're like, why was I've wasted so much of my life doing this manually? And you can just write a really cool automation script, run it once, and it just does everything. You're like, this is so cool. So that was quite fun. When I joined, my team lead, he got me involved in like doing a lot of automation scripts to build up my confidence in that area, and that was really fun.
You mentioned stand-up. Now, there may be people
Oh
listening
yeah.
who have no idea what a stand-up is. It's not stand-up comedy. Did you want to
And you
just
don't have to
talk?
actually stand up as well. I thought that.
Did you want to just quickly mention what is a stand-up and typically what happens at a stand-up?
Sure. So stand-ups, every team is different, but typically you'd end up having that once a day for about 15 minutes. And your team basically gets together and we go through the tasks that you were doing yesterday, like what like your progress with it. What are you planning on doing today? And do you have any blockers that your team can help like unblock for you? Whether it might be a certain, maybe you're waiting another team to do something before you can work on a certain task. So it sort of like gets everyone being like, okay, cool, we all know what we're doing today. Great. And then it's a quick 15 minutes. We don't go super deep or technical. If you do, then you sort of would take that offline and then have a separate call for that. But it's more just that everyone kind of knows every day, cool, like this is what we're working on today. All right, off you go.
Perfect, thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add about their typical work day before we go to the next question? Cool, perfect. Polly, this one is for you. Do you ever feel the urge to learn coding?
Yes, I have. I have many times in the past. And I have to say, what tends to happen is I get an urge to learn how to code and I'll try and do something. So someone will recommend a course online or that I read something or there's, what's that thing called? Code pen. I went through a stint of that for a while, just like experimenting with stuff and looking at what other people had done. But then what happens is because my day-to-day job is not coding, it's very hard to remember things. So I think coding is awesome. And I think a degree of code literacy is kind of necessary as a designer working with engineers. But I never get very far, which is really sad. It might say more about my willpower than anything else. But yeah, I'm sure it will happen again. And maybe I'll learn a bit more next time.
Oh, I love it. I think you're right. I think like being aware of it and how it works is useful, but like, yeah, and Ania touched on it earlier as well, that like if you're not doing these things every single day, you're just not going to keep at it. Or even just for me, I need to often do things so many times to then actually remember it. So like, yeah, if you're not doing it every day, but awareness, I think is yeah, a good observation. Someone has said, how do you transition from a junior position to a more senior one without a computer science background and without the right support from your company? And this is to anyone. Ania just shook her head. No.
The answer is you struggle. You struggle a lot. And, the places that I've worked at basically told me you're not good enough to be doing the coding job, and politely told me to find a different, put me on gardening leave type thing, and told me to find another job. So yeah, without the right support, you need to find that support elsewhere. Be it go to codebar and say, I'm struggling with this problem, can anyone explain it to me? And generally there's enough people that somebody at least knows vague place to do it. Talk to people online, try to find a different job if you can. The sort of, but yeah, try to vary it. As I said, if you have one preference for learning and environment, then unless you find that environment, you will struggle. Yes, and I'm sorry, it's not very encouraging, but yeah, it sucks. If you don't have the right support, it sucks, and it can be quite a massive drain on your mental health. Yeah, try to find a different job. I think that's the answer, or try to find a community that will help you learn. And how do you get better? Yeah, you find other jobs, you find opportunities, you know, whether it's a side project or volunteering project. Yeah. And like, there are people who will believe in you. And I think, Polly, you've said that you kind of wrote an email to somebody saying, hi, I think I can do this. Could you give me a chance? And people will. You just need to find the right person. And yeah, it's not super easy, but it can happen. So do persevere, but it's also worth saying, well, if I'm in the same situation 5 years down the line, like, what is going to happen then? Because it is, I think, realistic to say, well, it's a fair shot to you know, give something your 100% for 5 years, but if it's not working out after 5 years, like, what are you getting out of it? What are the transferable skills that help you with, you know, to pay the bills meanwhile, to pay the bills later? So yeah, I think good luck if you're in that situation. And yes, I'm sorry that's happening to you, because we all would love to have a, you know, super helpful environment where we can grow, where people are supportive, where people can answer your questions, when, you know, when people are clear with the expectations. And, you know, if they want you to do something, they say, okay, I want you to do something, you know, XYZ, I don't want to do it this way, rather than kind of assuming that you'll magically know. And yes, there are all sorts of places there. So yeah, good luck, I think.
Any other advice or tips?
One thing I'd like to add to that is also, I don't know if your company does reviews or feedback, like at the FT we have 360 feedback, we have like performance reviews and things like that, and that's also a good opportunity to sort of get feedback on how other people like how other people perceive how you work. But also, I don't know if you're if you're in a situation when you're trying to level up and you're finding a bit of a struggle, it also could be, is there clear competency like markers that you could be working towards as well? Is there like a framework, a competency framework? So like for a junior position, we expect you to be doing this within behavioral, this within technical, this within leadership, da, 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 da. And if you can demonstrate, because sometimes in these positions, and I've had this when I was in my NHS role, where you sort of have to make a case for yourself, unfortunately, when you're trying to get a promotion. But if you can concretely give evidence that actually these are the competencies for a junior engineer, for example, or a junior position, and I've got evidence to demonstrate I've actually met 80 to 90% of them, and actually I'm actually working on the mid-level stuff as well, then it's sort of hard for someone to argue that you're not ready to level up. And at that point, I'll probably ask for justification as to why I'm not like being able to progress in my career. And make an open conversation, but also go in there with data and facts as well. So that's one thing I would say.
Yeah, I would completely echo what Cynthia said. I think also sometimes, and this is another really practical, obvious thing, but sometimes it might not sometimes it's difficult for managers to disclose why a promotion isn't happening. And I've definitely had experiences where the promotion cycle is just really slow. So if you're someone who perhaps wouldn't start talking about a promotion until you feel like you're almost already there, it can then be incredibly frustrating if it's not immediately met with, oh yeah, sure, like this will happen. So I think talking about it probably earlier sometimes than you think you're ready, because just making it clear that that's your intention and that's what you want to work towards can be really helpful for your manager to sort of do the planning around it, because it is like a practical thing that has to be organized. So yeah, I think that that honesty, as as Ania expressed around like there are sometimes issues where maybe the environment you're in is not very supportive of you being promoted is definitely a thing, and hearing about that is important. But also sometimes it can come down to practical stuff and just making people aware really early on as to what your intentions are and what you want to do with your career can be super helpful.
Yeah, spot on. Anything else to add to that? No. No, go on.
Maybe if you don't feel like your company is too supportive, are there people at your company who you could reach out to for a bit of mentorship and guidance, or even outside of your company, get some sort of tailored advice or feedback from someone? I think the industry's full of really nice people, and mentorship seems to be quite a big part of it, so it's worth asking, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Marjan, do you have anything to add? You don't have to.
I would just pretty much echo what everyone else has said. If it's possible and you are in a position to, and your company isn't supportive, move realistically, and that's probably going to be your best bet. Or if there are people who are supportive, obviously reach out to them, as Andy said. But yeah, for the most part, a situation like that doesn't really change. And the best way to change is to change your environment.
Yeah.
So something I would like to add is a lot of people might be concerned coming from other places. It's like, oh, but you were at this place for 6 months and you switch jobs every 6 months, every year. What's up with that? That would never fly in some careers. But actually in tech, it's extremely common if you want promotion, pay rise. Sometimes it's just much easier to change a job entirely. And, you know, FT actually has pretty good track record. There's a lot of people who have, you know, are here for 5, you know, even 10 years. But other places, you know, 18 months, pretty common. And if you worry, like, what do I put if the work wasn't supportive? Looking for new opportunities, you know, they weren't providing you with the opportunity to grow. There's always something you can put in a very diplomatic way. Generally, they don't even ask these things in the interviews these days. And one resource that I want to mention that isn't tech specific, but is extremely helpful for things like interview tips, what to do in weird work situations, is a blog called Ask a Manager. If you put that into Google, it's been running for years, if not decades. And yeah, it's basically, you know, you can say, you know, what are tips for CV, for career changes, how to frame things, how to, you know, answer these weird questions that you can get at interviews, or how to deal with difficult problems at work, career changes, not career changes. Oh, I've, you know, going up for being a line report to being line manager. Very good, and I would definitely recommend to you know, to read, to just browse it every so often, because some stories are funny, some are serious, and actually really useful to kind of know they exist, and kind of give you confidence to, you know, do that leap, that people are doing it, there's wording to answer questions that come up, and you can do this.
Perfect. Someone has asked, have you noticed a significant change to the tech industry for new starters recently? They've been told that it's getting far more difficult to get their first job now. So has anyone noticed any changes?
Just from what's going on in the discords that I'm in, everyone's having really big issues getting, even people who are well established in techs, you know, years, 5, 8, 10 years of experience, you know, they're, you know, senior engineers for years, top-notch skill set, they're not even getting leads. So it's not just juniors or newcomers to the field that are having these issues. There are people who are well established who are also having these issues. So but yes, anecdotally, you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, it was very much a you know, yes, an engineer can apply to 5 roles, get accepted for 5 roles, shortage of engineers, fairly easy to get a job. And that sort of persisted for, I think, up until mid 2022. And I think from there, certainly starting January this year, if not a bit earlier, it started getting more and more difficult to, from what I hear on my tech friends talking about in Discord, that it is starting to get difficult to actually very difficult. And there are some job platforms that like you put in your CV and people like send you offers of saying, oh, do you want to work for us? And people who might have had multiple leads the previous time they used it 4 years ago, they're getting nothing at all. So unfortunately that's just the current climate from what I understand.
Yeah.
I think that's true from a design perspective as well. I think it is very increasingly difficult to find those entry-level roles. And over the past couple of years, I've mentored a few junior designers or people who want to move into UX design, and kind of got to a point where, again, I was using my sort of ex-colleagues and speaking to them about if you see any open roles, just ping them across, because I have people who would really appreciate seeing those job descriptions. So I started doing that every time I saw something that was entry level for a design role, because it's hard to find them. I think there are some job platforms that are a bit better than others. Like LinkedIn is kind of a necessary evil. It's not like the most intuitive place to search for a job, but it often has like the most options. Otter, I think, is getting pretty good. So I think just kind of asking people if you have a mentor, like asking them to look out for roles, because sometimes stuff is discussed on channels that people don't have wider access to. So yeah, I think the more we can share, the better. But it is hard. I think there's an acceptance that it is very hard at the moment.
Anything else anyone want to add? Oh, okay. For the coders, someone has asked, what language would you say is best to learn as a beginner to get into the industry? I think this is a really hard question to answer, but any thoughts on this question?
I have big thoughts on this question, because it's not about the language, it's about what you want to do. So never start with the language, because you may end up completely going down the wrong path, and then learning a language is actually not relevant. So I think you need to work backwards and figure out what type of engineering do you want to do, because each type of engineering will typically use a specific type of language. So if I had interest in doing web design, but then I'm learning, I don't know, Julia. Julia is a language you use for data science, and it makes zero sense for me to be learning Julia, for example, or things like that. So you need to first figure out what type of engineer you want to be, and then figure out what languages does this type of engineer do, and then you can whittle down and find one that you actually enjoy coding in. And that's the main thing. Find one that you actually enjoy coding in as well. And there's engineering types, like there won't just be that one language for one thing. Backend has many languages, front end has many languages, data science, blockchain, game dev, app development, like they all have multiple languages, and some languages do go across different engineering types, but you need to first figure out what sort of engineering role do you want before you start figuring out what language. That's my really, really good advice, and I highly recommend you follow it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Everyone else is nodding. Does anyone else want to add anything?
Also, I think just the act of problem solving or building things or whatever you're aiming to do is the most important bit. Changing between languages can be tricky, but also there's so much in common between them. Yeah, you can switch language. Well, I switched languages and it wasn't too bad.
And often a lot of the languages have similarities anyway, so actually it doesn't matter too much anyway which one you learn. Does anyone else have anything to add? to that. The next question is, if you could go back, would you do anything different about your first like tech job? Any takers?
I think if I could go back, well, knowing the information I know now, I'm assuming.
Yes.
If I could go back, I think I would and again, I realize it's because of my background in healthcare that I feel like everything has to all be fine before I run it, or I think the world's gonna die. But I would just probably tell myself it's okay, like just run the program, it's fine. It's okay to break things, and you actually learn a lot more from your errors. You learn a lot more because then you end up Googling, what does this error mean in the terminal, or like my program is throwing this, and you can actually like Stack Overflow will become your best friend. Googling, you'll get really good at it, because even now, as quote unquote established engineers and designers, like we would still have to Google in our day-to-day jobs now. Like it doesn't stop. You don't stop that whole process. And I think another thing I would tell myself if I had to go back is I would also, so when I was going through the free code camp modules, and again, I used to think, okay, I have to do every single thing from the module and I have to complete it all to 100%, else I'm not ready. And again, looking back, I probably could have just, and it's difficult because you don't know what you don't know. But I probably would have made my learning a bit more varied rather than just focusing on like web design. I think now, as in my current role, I actually quite enjoy the data structures and algorithms aspect of engineering rather than like the web development side of it. But a lot of my early stuff was web development. So I wish I'd known about data structures and algorithms and like Leak Code or Advent of Calendar, which is so much fun. You should definitely do it, especially as we're coming up to Christmas time. I'll put the link in the chat as well. But again, it's like these coding challenges, and they start really easy and it gets progressively harder as it gets closer to Christmas. But things like that, I wish I'd known about that rather than just focusing on the web design stuff, because I might have realized another aspect of engineering that I would have enjoyed more.
There is a Advent of Code Slack channel in our Slack for people that take part in it. And actually your comment on Stack Overflow, I remember in my last engineering role that Stack Overflow went down and we were like, well, we all may as well go home because none of us can work. So yeah, it's a useful tool. Does anybody else have anything to add about what they would do differently?
I think just like not being scared to take up space and challenge things, because I think as a new person to an industry, you actually have a very valuable, unbiased perspective. And even now, as a senior designer, when I work with people who are new to design, I always really appreciate it when people question, you know, why are you approaching it that way? Why not try it this way? Because I think sometimes when you've been in the industry for a while, you get quite entrenched in how you've always done things. And it's really refreshing when people speak up and say, oh, you know, why that way?
Yeah, totally. I once worked with someone who was colorblind, and we got given some designs and he went, I can't see this. There's just several grey, like various shadings of different colours. And it was really amazing because he was able to question the designers. And actually, as a result, our product was much better. And I won't say the company that I was working at, but they wanted to determine the temperature of your home through a colour chart. And he was like, just use numbers. No one knows numbers. Like if I want my room to be 20 degrees, I want it to be 20. Like my room isn't going to be bright pink or red, like let's just use numbers. And he was like, this is absolutely terrible. And yeah, exactly. So like he questioned it, and it was amazing, because then actually the product that we put out was better because of him. And you go, as a whole, that's why diversity on teams is also incredibly important. But yeah, he questioned it, and it was amazing that he did, because otherwise we would have put this app out to, it's an app that's used by over 1 million people. So yeah, does anyone else have anything to add? Cool. There is a question around salary negotiation, but I'm not entirely sure what the question exactly is. If you are switching careers when you are applying to your roles, maybe sometimes you're working in a senior role where you would still have to start an entry-level graduate salary. I'm not sure. Can anyone on the panel? I'm not sure what the question.
I think what they're
Go on, Ania.
I think what they're trying to say, if I was senior, office manager, will I get senior office manager salary when I switch to tech, or will I be lower down to apprentice or junior tech? And I think the answer to that, you will probably be on that tech scale to your new job, unfortunately. That has a bit of drawback in career changing, in that if you are making the leap from a senior position when you are earning more than a junior engineer, then you will need to budget accordingly. But also the advantage of tech is that I think there's much more earning potential than a lot of other jobs. So
yeah.
And I would also add to that, so as someone who's gone from like a managerial role basically back to being on a grad scheme, like you do feel the pinch and you do have to like budget for it. But as Anya mentioned, like I guess with the NHS salaries, like they are very much like capped to a certain point. And so I probably wouldn't have, I would have only been able to get so far anyways. Whereas in tech, it's just endless, which is great.
also,
But we'll go on.
A piece of gossip, we saw a job ad for the government, so civil services, head of info security. So you think that's like big job, right? The sort of cushy job that you have until you at the end of your career. It's like pay well. It was about 55 grand a year, which is like less than a senior engineer at the FT. And it's just like, you look at it and you think, what? How? But it's the government. So I guess if you want the security of a government job, then that's something. But as it shows, it can be, you can be in tech as head of infosec and still so yes, though you will need to make those choices eventually, and sometimes the like a lot of people who I know do try to save up and then either go part-time as they get older, or pick their causes a bit better and may opt to work for charity, because at the point where you're, for example, working, like, we don't necessarily work in tech sector per se at the Financial Times. We work in like journalism, and the same way that you might think, oh, Raspberry Pi charity, organization, that's tech, but actually they are a charity, so you will get charity wages. So yeah, I think it kind of depends where you look.
Yeah, totally. Anything else before we move to the next question?
I think it just, oh, sorry, you go.
Oh, I was just gonna say one last thing. So yeah, it's a lot more challenging to be able to stay on your current salary. But again, like Anya said, like each organization, you might find that actually your salary is transferable, because you may be on a salary that like maybe a similar one of a junior engineer. But definitely go on YouTube. I don't know if Codebar has any resources on this, but always negotiate your salary and practice in that area, because yeah, you should back yourself up. And the worst they say is no, but the best they say is yes. So I'm always an advocate of salary negotiation, especially for those who may feel a lot more less confident or might be a minority group in that sense.
We have a session going live on our YouTube in the next few weeks. We ran a session on it last Thursday as part of a collaboration with You've Got This, and it's 3 talks, and the final one was a open discussion on salaries and salary negotiation, because it's people don't like talking about salary and numbers, and so we did speak about it, and that should be going live actually in the next couple of weeks. So
great.
I think worth to add, it's not just salary, it's also benefits.
yes.
So you think, oh, salary might be lower, but your benefits like annual leave or learning budget or some other, working from home or flexible working hours, that might actually offset the bigger salary number. So when you think about negotiations, not just the number, think about everything else that the company can offer you, and talk about that.
So I saw a perk recently that was quite a significantly high pension. And that's something that, people don't necessarily think about, but actually, if you're someone who maybe wants to retire early, great perk. Polly, I know you were going to say something, so did you want to?
Yeah, it's just a small thing, and I realise it's not an opportunity that everyone has, but if you are moving internally, I think then there is a lot of wiggle room to maintain a previous salary, because in my experience of moving internally, you can make quite a strong case for saying, yes, I was a manager and I am going into a junior role, but actually I know this company really well. I know the teams, I know the processes, I won't have to be onboarded in a typical sense. And I think, as everyone else has said, you don't ask, you don't get. So be prepared to fight your corner. But I think internal moves are that there is that benefit of being able to argue that actually you can maintain the value that you're currently contributing and you'll learn quickly.
Yeah, spot on. So the last question, I think, we're just coming up to the end of time now. And I think it's actually, it's a really nice question to end on, which is, how did you know what tech role you wanted to get into if you only knew at first you wanted to get into tech? So, we discussed about choosing the language to know what area to go in, but how did you discover that at the beginning?
For me, it was trial and error. So I did lots of like Coursera courses. I tried data science, realized it was not for me. I really don't like probability and stats. I was like, cool, not going to be a data science. I tried product management. I thought, oh, I quite like people and like the sort of like metrics. I was doing a lot of that in my role as a medicine safety officer in my trust, like getting lots of data and going through the metrics. I thought maybe product management, being to pitch, products and get user feedback and from a business aspect. But I think whilst I was doing that in tandem and trying to reach out to people on LinkedIn who maybe have done this pharmacy to product manager switch, I was also interested in like the software engineering aspect, so that coding. And then from that, I realized that I actually quite enjoyed this. And sorry, give me 1 second. Working from home, someone's going to walk in. What was I saying? I've lost my train of thought. How did I know? You just have to trial and error, basically. Try to do as many free resources as possible. Try not to pay for things unless you really know that you definitely are interested in something. Because I've sunk like doing paid Coursera courses, and then I realized I actually have no interest in this at all. Again, doing hackathons was really helpful as well, because then I can actually like trial and test out, getting involved, like what does a designer do in a role? What does a product manager do in a role? What is an engineer? You get to talk to them, doing a hackathon experience. So online meetups, but yeah, try to experience as much as you can. And then just find something that makes you like, gives you that sparkle. Not sounding cheesy.
Anyone else? Marjan, do you want to add anything?
Just pretty much echoing what Cynthia said. It's pretty, trial and error, really. You don't know till you know. And if you don't try it, you can't figure it out, I guess. Because things can sound really interesting. Like I thought I really wanted to go into data science or machine learning and things like that. And then I went to a few talks and stuff by data scientists and people who work specifically in machine learning. I was like, there's so much maths in this. I don't know about that. And yeah, otherwise I could have just traveled down an alleyway that I was never going to really flourish into. So there are lots of actually resources, especially in London. I know UCL does quite a lot of talks with AI in medicine, and also a lot of talks with collaboration with Google and DeepMind. And all of those have been, to my knowledge, free. And so just go along to those, see how you feel, ask questions. Everyone's always willing to help share knowledge and share what they did. So just get involved, or try and get involved as best you can, and see what you like.
Perfect, thank you. Anybody else have anything to add?
Don't think you're necessarily stuck with one thing either. I think the skills are so transferable. You can try something, see if you like it, and then pivot. I seem to see a lot of people do that at the FT, and yeah. Also, once you've started something, from my experience, you tend to get quite a good view of what other people do as well. So if you're very interested in it, you know to go and do it. You have a bit more of an educated idea about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, I started as a researcher and then became a designer. I don't think you're bound to a particular role. Once you're in that sort of product tech space, I think you get an idea of what you want to do. So yeah, I didn't actually ever consider becoming an engineer. I just thought, I don't know. I think I saw design as my end goal, and then research was the step towards it. But there was a point where I thought I could keep doing research and I'd be really happy. But I think I just gravitated towards design because I like making things.
Nice. Oh, well, perfect ending. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along this evening and asking such amazing questions. A huge thank you to our 5 panelists for being amazing and answering all the questions and giving us such an insight into your journeys and lots of amazing tips and advice for our community. A huge thank you to FT as well for sponsoring. And yeah, I hope you all have an enjoyable evening. Thank you so much.